Learn how you can save time and tuition dollars with Wilmington University's new Dual Credit Advantage. Go to wilmu.edu/dual credit.
What's up, Sixers fans? This is the Sixers Talk podcast presented to you by Wilmington University. WilMU works. No Danny Palmel, so you're stuck with me, Ben Berry. Follow me on Twitter. I am Ben Berry, Twitter, Instagram. We're joined by the legend, the original Sixers Talk host, Paul Hudrick from Liberty Ballers. How you doing today, Paul?
I'm doing great, Ben. I appreciate you because I do feel as though sometimes Sixers Talk is kind of like my baby. So I appreciate you, the kind intro and the kind words. I appreciate it very much.
I compare this to, like, I grew up watching wrestling. I don't know about you. Don't watch it anymore. But I would say it's like The Rock going back to Monday Night Raw now. That's you coming back to the Sixers Talk podcast.
I like it.
I'm trying to be positive because the Sixers, they pooped the bed. They had a chance to close out the series Monday night against the Raptors. The Raptors pretty much beat them badly from beginning to end of the game. It just wasn't a pretty look. What are your initial takeaways?
Well, Ben, as you know, I'm a new father. I've been up since 6 a.m. and I am as sleepy as the Sixers looked through four quarters tonight. It was really rough, man. To score 14 points in the second quarter of a home playoff game in which you could close out the series. And then the third quarter, it's funny. They're down 14 at the half. They go into the third quarter and they cut in and they won the third quarter. I'm sitting next to John Clark and I'm like, dude, it doesn't even feel like they just won the quarter. Like it feels like they're still down big. It was miraculous that it was single digits going into the fourth quarter. But yeah, really throughout the entire game, it just felt like a slog. Offensively, nothing was working. Clearly, Joel Embiid hindered by that hand. It's very apparent. It's very obvious. James Harden and Tyrese Maxey. I mean, you're starting backcourt. They gave you nothing scoring wise. Danny Green actually gave you a little spark. Tobias Harris has been their most consistent player through 5 games, which I don't think anyone expected to say that sentence through 5 games in this series, but he has been. He's been very, very good, and so. Yeah, I have big concerns, offensively throughout this game, and then it's things that I have concerns about. Not only even just this series, but moving on. If they do move on, if they're not the first team to blow a 3-0 lead in NBA history, I have pretty big concerns about the offense moving forward.
It's so many things you just said I want to touch on. I will start off because since you've known me, I've been the president of the Tobias Harris's Cheeks fan club, or the Tobias Harris's Cheeks club. Yes, he's been the best player of this series because Joel Embiid has been up and down. He's been the most consistent, so he's been the best. Embiid played poor tonight, and it wasn't the offense that got me as much as it was the defense. It just, I don't know if it wasn't there. Clearly it wasn't there energy-wise, but I'm not sure if he was overthinking the thumb injury or what, but defensively, the Raptors, by smaller, less talented players, they kind of pushed them around at times. And it was shocking to see. I've never seen anything like that since Embiid has been in the league. So after that, Danny Green gave us – we just wasted a great for Danny Green standards performance. I think at one point in the game, he was the only Sixer who would have made three-pointer. It was just pretty bad shooting. So Harris and Green played well tonight for the Sixers. Besides that, it's been bad. Doc Rivers, to me, at times just didn't look like he knew what he was doing. There's a moment he had Maxey, Harris, Niang, I want to say Matisse, and maybe I don't know. It was just It was a lineup out there that had no business being out there. It was just bad. Then your boy James Harden, who it's tough because I know what Ben Simmons, and we will touch slightly on that later, wasn't playing. So any trade was a plus. And I didn't want to be down when they made the move, but Harden, big games, also just looking older. He's not who he was in Houston. So far through the series, he's averaging 18.5 points per game and under 40% shoot, 37.3. it has not looked good. And yeah, today's game was just a slugfest, just dragging it through the mud. And outside of Embiid's game winner in game 3, this could easily be like a 3-2 series Raptors.
Yeah, I mean, really, since game 2, they haven't played particularly well. They really haven't. I thought game 3, they turned the ball over a lot, but at least they showed fight. They fought back in that game, and they did enough, obviously, to win. I get if Joel Embiid doesn't hit that shot, that changes a lot of things, perhaps, because keep in mind that game was tied too, so it would have been double overtime at that point. But yeah, I mean, clearly the last 2 games they got worked. There's no other way to say it. They got, especially again on the offensive end of the floor. You mentioned Joel Embiid's defense, and yeah, that third quarter, I agree with you. I've never seen a stretch like that from him where he was just getting beat constantly, and I don't think it was anything particularly special the Raptors were doing. I just think he looked off. I don't know if it's the hand. He was asked about it post game. He said, he just didn't have an explanation. He said he doesn't know. He said he needed to move his feet better, and he just just wasn't there. He wasn't in the right spots. When Doc Rivers was asked about it, he said he thought he looked tired, that they tried to pull him out of the game, but he didn't want to come out. He wanted to stay out there. And I think that is probably what you saw, is that you saw a guy that saw his team struggling, and he didn't want to leave the court. So I give him credit for that. That's it's a tough spot to be in. And again, especially when you're dealing with, torn ligament in your shooting thumb, and just there's a lot going on there, and the team's down, and you're fighting and you're doing all you can, and just it's not there for you. And that does happen. And then, pivoting to James Harden. Yeah, I mean, I have big time concerns about his scoring. I thought when I watched I would even say the first 4 games, honestly, because I didn't think he was like terrible in game 4, but I thought okay, this version of James Harden is not vintage James Harden. It's not the guy. It's not even the guy last year that was in the playoffs for the Nets. But I think this guy is still good enough to help this team win basketball games and possibly even win a title, because I thought, as a true point guard, as a guy that can run the team, as a guy can make things easier for other people, as a guy that can get the ball to Joel Embiid in advantageous spots and then choose his spots to score, I thought that could work. But I think Joel Embiid's injury now, I'm not sure that can work. I think you need a little bit of vintage James Harden here and there. And then on top of that, I think it's a domino effect. And I think you're seeing it's affecting, James Harden's ineffectiveness is affecting Tyrese Maxey and vice versa. I think they were feeding off each other so well for the first couple of games, and it just hasn't been there. So, yeah, I mean, I just have really big concerns over Harden not taking open shots and not being able to finish at the rim, and then almost kind of shying away from it because he's not getting calls. And I will say that, he's been bad, so I'm not trying to defend him overly here, but clearly that emphasis on foul calls has hurt him substantially. He gets nothing now. Even when it's a legitimate call and he's not even grifting, he just doesn't get it anymore. And it's a shame that that's the case for the Sixers. But I'm sure a lot of teams are pretty happy about that. I'm sure the Toronto Raptors are very happy about that. But there's no question you need Tyrese Maxey to look much more like the player he was in games 1 and 2. And you need James Harden to just, again, if he's the guy in games 1 and 2 who's just facilitating and gathering up the assists and making sure the team was solid and not turning the ball over, that version is fine. That'll get them through to the next round. Is that going to be enough? If when they play the Miami Heat, that's a pretty big question that I don't have the answer to.
Me and Danny discussed that Saturday. But speaking of that, shout out to everyone who came out to the live podcast Saturday at Urban Saloon. It was a lot of fun. But I told Danny, I think for the Sixers to make a deep playoff run, he has to score 25 a night. And it has to be efficient, at least 25 and for it to be efficient. But going back to Harden in this series, it's not even that he's missing shots or not taking open shots. It's that how much of a struggle it looks for him to get a shot off. He's never been the most athletic player in the league. I will compare him to a Luka. Luka's not the most athletic person, but there's a quick step to get somebody on the hip. And then once he has you on the hip, it's either take it to the rack, draw a foul, pull up. pull-up jumper. But it just looks like a struggle, and it brings up a lot of questions for the future because right now he's on pace to be the highest paid player in NBA history when his contract is up. It's like Daryl Morey is going to run into a problem or just a scenario. What do they do now when they get there? Right now, it just does not look good. And as you said with Tyrese Maxey, like they fed off each other. Tyrese Maxey I know he's young, and this is a year ago. Even though he who shall not be named, I don't want to bring him up. I thought it was unfair to put all that on Tyrese Maxey, but Maxey has shown this past year like he's up to the challenge. However, still at times, even though he averaged 30 points in the first 2 games, which was big, I didn't expect that to happen through an entire series, let alone the playoffs. It shows still at time that he's still young. He still had a lot of room to grow. The Sixers just look overmatched through and through.
Yeah, I think this is why Tyrese Maxey right now is a budding star and maybe not quite a star. I think he's like it's a matter of when, not if, for his first All-Star appearance. But like you said, he's 21 years old. This is his second NBA season. He's been thrust into a role he was not expecting to be put into in just his second year on a team that's trying to win a championship. It's a lot to ask of a guy. And like you said, he stood up to the challenge for most of the year. He's really filled that role. The first 2 games of the series, he was electric. And now the last 3, he's really struggling. He's got to figure it out. And the Sixers have to figure out how to get him back in those advantageous spots, to get him aggressive again, to attack those closeouts, to use his speed to beat Toronto's size. And you saw it in spurts tonight, but just not consistently enough. And, going back to Harden, I will say this, though. I hear what you're saying. You're not wrong that, offering him a max contract seems pretty dubious right now, and it's $270 million is an awful lot of money. But I got to say this, Daryl Morey's not dumb. Like, he's not going to bid against himself, right? Like, right. Quite frankly, like, no, this version of James Harden, with all due respect to him, no one's giving this version of James Harden $270 million this offseason on the open market. Like, who's going to do that? So
let me tell you why I disagree with you on that.
Okay.
Because I always think players, no matter what sport, is going to get the money they end up wanting and they end up getting, because it only takes one. And someone always proves me wrong.
But it's like, to me, if you look around the landscape of the league, what team has the cap space to do it and then would be motivated to do it? Like, I can't think of a team that fits that criteria, that's got a max space open. You have to think it's a competitive. It's got to be a contender, right? Like, he's going to be 33 years old. He's not going to go to a young team.
I hear you, and I agree with you. The logic behind it, I completely agree with the logic. I just know someone out there that always proves me wrong when it comes to this type of thing.
Fair enough. But I think too, like, there's a reason why he didn't opt into that deal quite yet, and I think him and Daryl Morey have a relationship. I think there's probably already been discussions with his agent and he doesn't have an agent, right? I think he just has a manager, but I'm sure there's been discussions with him on how to navigate this offseason, what they are thinking about doing. You know what I mean? Like, I'm sure those conversations have already taken place. Preliminary ones, obviously, because they're trying to win now, but I'm sure Daryl and James had discussed that possibility of what his next contract will look like, what Daryl could maybe maneuver to maybe bring another guy in here, what he can do and all that. So I don't know that he's going to get that max money. If he does, I think the team that's going to give it to him is going to be the Sixers, but we'll see. And the other thing too, Ben, was like, how do you weigh how much of it right now is that hamstring and how much of it is him being 32 years old and having a lot of tread on the tires? Because just last year, this guy was playing at an MVP level with the Nets down the stretch. He was sensational for them. So it's hard for me to think that within a year, that's just gone. You know what I mean? Like, I feel like that the hamstring issues are still lingering and it's still there. And it's a lot to bet on, but I just have this funny feeling that when at some point he's going to get healthy. And look, he's not going to be James Harden scoring title guy,
Not Houston
MVP.
James Harden.
Yeah, he's not going to be that guy, but I think there is a better version of James Harden that when healthy does exist.
So I think he has more left in the tank, and he's better than what we have seen. What I tell people, and I'm not saying you're saying this at all, but a lot of people, whether it's James Harden, Kevin Durant, LeBron James, they're also playing at great levels, all-star caliber levels. I think people forget like how old these guys are. And like sooner or later, the body is going to start to break down. Like, yeah, James Harden is only 32, 33.
He'll be 33 this offseason.
Yeah. But is also 12, 13 years in the league at this point. And Kevin Durant's been in the league for 14 years at this point. I think that's a lot of just tread on the tires.
Playoff games too.
Playoff games.
That's
that's another season when you add it all up. James Harden, I know when he was in Houston, I would say probably outside of LeBron, or actually hands down probably played the most games in the league because he wasn't doing the load management thing really in Houston.
I think he led the league in games played and minutes in the same season at one point in Houston. Yeah.
So it's just a lot of tread. And I'm not saying what Daryl and the Sixers should do. I just think it's something everyone should be cognizant of and think about before they like, oh, let him walk or re-sign him. And you can't just say this is a one-off, whether it's his postseason performances or a bad game. It's something people actually need to dig into, see how he's feeling, talk to doctors, medical staff, and I guess the stat nerds.
Yeah, and I think once the season ends, we'll get a better fit. Like right now, he's not going to give you anything, right? He's just going to keep telling us he's healthy. He's going to keep playing through it. But I'm sure we'll find out when the season ends during either, after they're eliminated or during the championship parade. We'll find out exactly the extent of how much his hamstring was actually bothering him in the playoffs. Because I'm sure it still is. I'm sure it still is. And we all know like a hamstring injury, like clearly we're not world-class athletes, but we've all dealt with a hamstring before in our lives, and that's not fun. And that lingers. It doesn't go away. So when you're trying to play NBA playoff games at a high level, clearly it's going to affect you. So yeah, you're right. Daryl Morey and the Sixers are going to have to weigh that. Like again, how much of it is the tread, how much of it is the injury, and then somewhere in the middle is probably your answer.
All right, moving on. Before I get to Doc Rivers, I meant to bring this up earlier. The Sixers lost to the Raptors without Fred out there, without the Drake lookalike. That's practically a guardless team at that point. It really stings when I bring that up. I don't know if that's something you thought about, but when the game was coming to an end, I thought about that. Like that's kind of embarrassing.
To an extent, I mean, listen, they have Scotty Barnes is kind of played a point. It's funny because people kind of compared him to Ben Simmons coming out, and you can kind of see that he's got a little bit of that just like all around game for his size, and he does play like some point guard for them and does handle a lot for them. You saw Siakam obviously handle the ball a lot. But I hear what you're saying. Like Van Vliet's their only like true point guard on the roster. Gary Trent Jr. is a guard, but he's an off guard. He's not a point guard. Like that's not really his deal. So, yeah, to lose to a team without a real point guard, but then again, that might have thrown the Sixers off. I don't know, because that size and that length clearly gave them problems all night long on both ends of the floor. So, it's a tough pill to swallow for Van Vliet not to be out there, even though Van Vliet didn't look like Van Vliet this series. He was clearly banged up, but I think even him at 75% or whatever, the Raptors would have gladly taken that. So yeah, it does make it sting even more that you weren't able to take advantage of that.
Matisse Thybulle came into the game to some boos, some cheers, and he made one basket, or there's one basket I remember seeing.
Well, he didn't actually make the basket.
Exactly.
The Raptors accidentally put the ball in their own basket, and he was credited with it.
He was credited. So. Yeah, it was. I don't know what the Sixers – well, he can't play in Toronto in Game 6. Well, hypothetically speaking, Sixers go – if they move forward into the playoffs, come back in Game 7, what's going to happen if pretty much the other team is yelling, he's with us. They're not worried about him shooting. It would say doesn't matter how good your defense is if you're just a zero on the offensive stat sheet and just completely a non-factor.
Yeah, it's a huge concern, especially, even after this series, if they get through it, and they're going to probably play the Miami Heat. You already know that Erik Spoelstra knows exactly what to do to play Matisse Thybulle off the court. I mean, he's one of the best coaches in the league. He's been around. He knows what to do. And the Miami Heat are one of the smartest, most disciplined defensive teams in the league. So they're just going to load up on Joel Embiid and James Harden and just leave Matisse Thybulle in the corner by himself, or just leave him in a dunker spot. I mean, there were times during when the James Harden stuff, when he first got here and the offense was humming a little bit, where they used Matisse Thybulle really well. They used him in a dunker spot. They used him as a screener and a roller. And I thought Harden was actually getting something out of him offensively, and it looked pretty good. And then, I hate to say it, but what killed the momentum with that was when he couldn't play in Toronto. And then Danny Green had a great game, and then that was it. And he just hasn't been able to get that feel back with Harden. He clearly, offensively, he was a disaster tonight. Disaster. And it killed the momentum of the game. That's, that second quarter is when he was most brutal. They scored 14 points in that quarter. So, he missed 2 free throws. He missed 2 threes. He had, and then he had that play in the corner where he's wide open and he passed it back to Tyrese, and it was a terrible pass and a turnover. So just offensively, he's completely lost. And like I said, just he had that momentum. He had that connection and chemistry with Harden a little bit where he was becoming a viable offensive player. He was actually shooting the ball better too at that point. But, say what you want, whatever you believe, whatever that's your thing. That's between you and whoever. But clearly him missing that regular season game in Toronto, I think set him back. And I don't think he's fully recovered from it.
Yeah, it's just unfortunate, sad to see, and I agree with you. Whatever y'all think, that's among you guys. I'm not getting into it, but he is so unimaginably bad. It's nearly impossible to make up for it on any other way on the court. Paul, I got some stats for you. Doc Rivers has now lost 7 of his last 8 opportunities to close out a series. He has 31 such losses in those games. Already the most by a coach in NBA history. When he was hired, Danny said, I dragged Doc Rivers on this pod. I thought I was just stating facts. He had Tracy McGrady in Orlando, never made it out the first round. When Ray Allen and Kevin Garnett showed up in Boston, Paul Pierce was going to leave because he didn't want to be coached by Doc anymore. He had that Lob City team in LA that was supposed to be the next dynasty, and they got lapped by the Warriors. Kawhi Leonard, Paul George come in. It was only 1 year there. He comes to Philly, blows the lead to this embarrassing loss last year in the playoffs to the Hawks. He has, 3 different 3-1 leads in the playoffs and lost each time? How much pressure you think Doc feels right now? And if they don't move forward, how much of this, does this change his legacy to you or the way you think people will look at him?
Well, I don't think Doc feels pressure because I think
he's the next Lakers coach.
Right. Maybe, he likes the weather in LA better anyway, and he likes to play golf. No, but I think he doesn't feel pressure because for better or worse, he's been here before. So I don't think he's feeling it in any way. If they lose and they're the first team to ever blow a 3-0 series lead, I think 145-0 all time, teams that have gone up 3-0.
144-0 all time since the Celtics closed it out against the Nets.
Gotcha. So yeah, if you're if that happens, sure, that certainly changes his legacy in a very negative way. If they're the first team to ever do that, especially like you already mentioned, when you consider the other blown leads of the past, it is quite dubious. I don't, it's not all on him, but if it happens to you multiple times, you're probably not part of the solution either. So yeah, and people are probably going to kill me for saying it, and I don't care, but I don't pin a ton on Doc for the last 2 games. There are things certainly he could have done better. I think one of the things he spoke pregame and he said he's not changing the way he uses Joel Embiid at all. I think that's a mistake because Joel Embiid has a torn ligament in his thumb, and I don't think you could just use him the way you normally use them. I think you have to use them differently and do some different things. So, and I think tonight would have been a night to maybe do that. And I would have perhaps used them more as a screener and a roller and maybe a popper, because it doesn't sound like shooting threes really bothers him. He missed a couple tonight, but they weren't bad shots. They looked good out of his hand. I think one rimmed out. Like they were not bad shots at all. So I'll say that maybe Doc could have done better there. I think it was a mistake to go back to Matisse Thybulle in the second half. I think it's funny because to me, Furkan Korkmaz is not a playoff rotational player. He's just not. I don't think he's good enough. But if there was ever a spot to maybe give him a look, it was probably that third quarter when Matisse was really struggling and wasn't giving you anything, and you couldn't hit a three. That seems like it might have been the spot to maybe try to plug Furkan Korkmaz in, see if he can nail a couple threes and get you back into the game. And if he doesn't, you throw him back on the bench. So I was little things like that. And then like you mentioned that lineup that he had in there in the third quarter at one point where I don't know what he was thinking, where it's no Harden and no Embiid. To me, any lineup that doesn't feature one or both of those guys is a bad lineup in the postseason. That's just my feelings on it, especially when they're both playing, over 40 minutes. Like one of them has to be on the court at all times. So yeah, I mean, me personally, I don't think they're going to be the first team to do this. I don't. I just think they're too talented with Joel Embiid. Granted, it's not James Harden of old, but it's James Harden. I expect Tyrese Maxey to bounce back and have a bigger game. Tobias Harris has been good. So and then when you look back in history, I don't know, you could check me on this, but I think the last time a team forced a game 7 was like, after being down 3-0, was like 2003. And then I think the last time a team got to where we are now, where they forced a game 6, was 2015. And then obviously I think it was the Bucks and the Bulls, and then that series ended in game 6. So I don't think they're in line for a historical meltdown here. I could be wrong because they haven't done a ton to instill confidence, and I get why a lot of people are kind of on the ledge right now. And yeah, it doesn't look good for Doc Rivers. It truly doesn't. But I think they get through this round. The next round, when he's got to go toe-to-toe now with Spo, that's going to be just as big of a challenge as he had to do with Nick Nurse. So I'm not as worried about this series because I think they are going to win. I could see them, winning perhaps in game 6 and closing it out and being done with it. I do have concerns going forward about how Doc's going to use guys, if he's going to change, if he's going to, kind of move off some of his rigid ways, which he has done, to be fair, to defend him a little bit throughout, the first 5 games here. But yeah, it is a dubious legacy that has a chance to become much more obviously dubious if they somehow blow the series.
So I'm going to come back to Doc real quick. It's a stat I forgot to mention earlier. OG has scored more points this series than James Harden, which is kind of – I just make it at what you want to, fans. OG has scored more points this series than James Harden. So, Doc, I don't think the Sixers are going to lose this series. I still don't think that. It's probably going to go 7. That's just uncomfortable to say, and I know fans don't want to hear that. But I think the Sixers still win the series. However, by no means should I say no one should be worried. By no means should I think anyone should be talking trash or being 100% confident. There is nothing I've seen in the last, 2 games that makes me completely confident and I can just lay back, throw my hands up, kick my feet up that it's going to be a cakewalk for the Sixers. I think the Raptors have life. I think deep down they believe they can win this series. I think it's going to be jumping Thursday night in Toronto. And I think all the pressure is on the Sixers. And I will say this, only reason this series won't be a bigger storyline Tuesday morning whether it is on Fox Sports, NBC Sports, ESPN. Only reason it won't be a bigger story nationally is because the Jazz got waxed by the Mavericks on Monday night. Then the Nets got swept and Ben Simmons didn't even show up to the arena, which is a whole thing of itself. But I think the Sixers win the series. However, fans, don't get arrogant, don't get cocky. There's plenty to be concerned about.
Yeah, I like I said, I think they're going to take care of business, but I have serious concerns about several things going forward, taking on a really good, really deep Miami Heat team, which it appears that's what would be the case. I think that series will start Monday, so not a lot of turnover either. Now you know, if you win the series even Thursday, you cost yourself, 3 extra days of rest and practice or whatever that you could have got in to prepare for Miami, but now you have to go to Toronto and win a basketball game instead. So yeah, Joel Embiid's thumb is my biggest concern, absolutely. And then, Harden's scoring is way up there as well. Tyrese Maxey being up and down, way up there for me as well. The backup center situation, Paul Reed is their best option, but he's not a perfect option. And so that's going to continue to be an issue. Which Danny Green are we going to get on a nightly basis? Because, you touched on Danny Green. It's funny, if Danny Green plays like this in game 4, the series is over. It's a sweep. He was great tonight, but he wasn't great. He wasn't great in game 3 or 4. He had two really tough nights. So if he's that guy, if he's the guy who was tonight, the series is already over. So, what's George Niang? He's really struggled with the Raptors' athleticism. How is he going to look against the Heat? Shake Milton is, I thought tonight looked really out of place tonight. I thought he looked overmatched during his minutes. Bad. I thought he's looked okay in the series. I thought tonight, though, he looked overmatched. How's he going to look against the Miami? So I again, just have serious concerns about this team, starters, bench, everybody. And then, we already talked about Thybulle and where does he fit? And with Spoelstra being able to kind of exploit him and the Miami Heat being so disciplined and so smart. And then you got to worry about containing Jimmy Butler. Although Tobias Harris looks like a friggin' all-world defender right now.
So out of nowhere.
I feel pretty good about him guarding Jimmy Butler, but they have a lot of other threats, whether it's Tyler Hero. Max Strus has been a revelation for them. Kyle Lowry's banged up, but when Kyle Lowry gets healthy, gets back in the lineup. And then, Joe's Bam Adebayo is going to make Joe work. He's going to make Joe move, and that's not going to be an easy matchup. So once they even get through this series, which they still have to do, the road ahead is not any easier.
It's not easy at all. So it was important to me that Sixers sweep this series so they can get rest before they face the Heat, especially after the Heats lost that game to the Hawks. It's like, okay, that series is going unnecessary 5 games now. Sixers, get that rest, relax. And we got before it was confirmed, the reports and the rumors that Embiid had the thumb injury, close up the series in 4, and now it's going 6. And they missed a chance at the sweep. But speaking of sweeps, our former first-round draft pick, he who shall not be named, but he looked the other day, he was at the next game looking like Skeeter from Doug for anyone that watched that show as a kid. Boy, he looked like Skeeter from Doug, didn't he?
I joked today that I thought he looked like kind of a new age Joker, which makes sense because he's apparently an agent of chaos now. So
What do you make? Like last time we had you on the pod, it was at the beginning of the season when all the drama happened at the start of training camp. And just go. What do you think?
So I'll start it with this. I wish no ill will on Ben Simmons. I hope he's healthy. Mentally and physically. I hope he has a long career. I hope he plays for a very long time and he has great success. But I am really glad that I don't have to cover him anymore. Because there's just this feeling kind of like there's always something. And, fair or unfair, I mean, I don't want to downplay his back injury. I don't want to downplay any mental health issues he's having or going through formerly or currently. But it's just I don't know where he is And I'm just glad I don't have to analyze it as I can just look at it from far away and say, hey, as a human, I hope you are well. I hope you I hope you do all the steps and everything to get healthy mentally and physically. And great. I hope you have a wonderful career. I hope you win a Defensive Player of the Year. You probably should have won one already. I hope you win a couple. Great success to you, sir. But for me, I would rather talk about James Harden not being able to score and all of that than have to talk about what's going on in Brooklyn right now. And there's just this weird disconnect there, clearly. I mean, right? And then there's always this, and how I felt during the whole holdout was there was this need for his camp to always control the message, right? It always had to be them who was out in front of everything. And I felt like that Woj report today was that. It's Rich Paul and it's Clutch really trying to get out in front of stories and get their spin on it. And again, for better or worse, I'm just glad that I don't really have to deal with it anymore. So that's my honest answer.
I'm happy you don't have to deal with it anymore. I'm happy for you. I remember a couple of years ago, you and Danny gave me some flack because I didn't think he had a desire to be great. That's completely opinion-based, and there's no analytical evidence, no data that can support that one way or another. I hope he's mentally healthy, emotionally healthy, physically healthy, spiritually healthy, all that. I want everyone to win in life unless they're competing against me. That's just completely honest. I just thought it was unusual that he could possibly play game 3, possibly game 3 and 4, or he could play game 4 and maybe come back as early as game 3. Then they said no to game 3. Then it was no game 4. And it wasn't to me that he wasn't playing at all. It was more, I don't know if the net said it or rumor, but it was approached, and they were asked, Steve Nash as well as Ben Simmons. Steve Nash said, as far as he knows, he wasn't playing. And Ben Simmons kind of mentioned and threw the idea out there like he was excited to get back on the court or help the team. And then out of nowhere, he couldn't play. I don't know what it's like in that locker room. I'm not going to say this is how Steve Nash or Bruce Brown or KD or Kyrie would feel. I just wouldn't be shocked if players, his teammates, look at him differently, especially after what happened in Philadelphia. And I think the whole thing, bigger than Ben, just makes me think of how this will affect the CBA and players in the future when the CBAs need to be renegotiated and just contracts going forward.
Right. And, I don't want to accuse Ben of this, and I sincerely do not want to accuse him of this or anybody of this. But if he has a legitimate mental health issue and that's why he couldn't play, okay, fair enough. And it just gets, because we know mental health is such a gray area that this could very well be a very real, legitimate issue with Ben Simmons, and he might win through an arbiter and get some money back from the Sixers. But like you just mentioned, the issue is now what's to stop a player that just simply wants out of a place to say, "Oh, I'm having mental health issues. Get me out of here," just because they want out. And so, I don't want to accuse Ben Simmons of that. I don't believe him to be nefarious in that way of pulling something like that. But there are people who are in this world who take advantage of things like that. And especially when there's money involved, people will say and do a lot of messed up things. So, I worry that the precedent this is going to set when you look at star players going forward. I just have big concerns for what it can mean for other star players forcing their way out. And I think right now, both the Nets and the Sixers are looking at this, and I give the slight edge to the Sixers as far as who won this trade, but I don't know that anybody is going to look back and say that they, they definitely won the trade unless the Sixers again go on a run and win a championship and they're down Broad Street, which right now it's hard to believe that after watching the last two games that could happen. But to bring it back to Simmons, I just have very big concerns for what this can mean going forward. And if you're the Nets, I don't know how you go into this offseason and like you plan on him being a part of this, and I don't know how it's going to look. You have no indication of whether him and Kyrie and KD, if that's going to work. It's just there are so many more questions than answers surrounding Ben Simmons right now. And again, Godspeed to him. I hope he's great. I hope everything works out for him. But it's an ugly situation, and it's got a possibility to lead to other ugly situations with star players down the road.
I will say the Nets, this might sound weird or crazy. That's probably not even their biggest thing to figure out situation. This is year 3 of the KD Kyrie experiment. You can write year 1 off as a wash because KD was injured. But in 3 years, they've only won 1 playoff series. And we can say it's a super team, right? Is that safe to say they're a super team?
Yeah. They qualify, yeah.
And we would say that LeBron James, Dwayne Wade Heat was the first, modern day super team that came through free agency. Yeah,
because Boston was through trade, so I guess through free agency we go Miami, yeah.
And those guys were a little older, and they had injuries, but LeBron James, Dwayne Wade, and Chris Bosh in year 3 they were winning their second championship. In the first year, they went all 3 years. This team is one playoff series, so gotten out the first round once. I don't know how good of a coach Steve Nash is, but I'm not saying he deserves to get fired, but that's never been a reason anyone has ever kept their job either. Their way of constructing the team just hasn't worked, so we'll see what happens there as well.
Yeah, it's funny. I saw a lot of people. The thought was, you can put Ben Simmons in that Bruce Brown role, and I'm like, well, first of all, Bruce Brown's pretty good in Bruce Brown's role, and then the other thing is Bruce Brown is a willing and capable 3-point shooter, so that adds a slightly different dynamic than what Ben Simmons does. And I'm just curious, I really like Nick Claxton. I think he's a pretty good young backup big in this league. I think he'll probably wind up being their starting center next year because Drummond's going to walk, you would think. And so he's not going to space the floor. So what are you going to do? You're going to put him and Ben Simmons on the floor together with KD and Kyrie, and then I guess Bruce Brown's the fifth guy, Joe Harris will be back, so maybe it's Joe Harris. But I can't imagine the spacing is going to be great with Ben Simmons and Nick Claxton both on the floor. Do you start Ben Simmons at the 5? I don't know what is going to happen. And then it's is Ben Simmons going to entertain that notion? Whether is Steve Nash even going to be the coach, and what will the next coach look like, and how will that coach view Ben Simmons? Because in Philadelphia, 2 head coaches couldn't get the best out of Ben Simmons offensively. So, is that the focus of their offense? Well, it can't be, right? It can't. That's the other thing is it can't. Their focus for a coach can't be, we need a guy who can get through to Ben Simmons, because you need a guy who can keep KD and Kyrie happy. So it's
a lot.
If they move on from Nash, it's going to be really complicated. So I don't envy Sean Marks. Kudos to him for getting the star players to get there, but he's got a really difficult offseason ahead of him. He's going to have to change the entire makeup of his team, even if he doesn't change head coaches.
Paul, thank you for coming on the podcast. When we were texting, it said 20, 25 minutes, and apparently we like talking to each other that much. We've gone 45. I know you're a father. You got things to do. You also need your sleep. It's 2 things I want to say before we get out of here. One, next year, I hope the Nets bring up David Duke Jr. just for my own entertainment, because I want his nickname to be Sheets. If you don't get that reference, Google it. Figure it out. David Duke Jr. I want to hear on TNT or the ESPN broadcast them calling him Sheets. And the second thing, I want everyone to go follow my man Paul Hudrick on Twitter, @Paul Hudrick. Is that your IG as well at Paul Hudrick?
I think it's Paul Hudrick 3, but
you'll find him. Google search Paul Hudrick.
It's just a bunch of pictures of my son on the Instagram, so there's not much there.
Oh, okay. So he's not breaking NBA news and Sixers news on there, but beautiful kid, beautiful family.
Thank you, man. I appreciate it very much.
I appreciate you. That's Paul Hudrick. I'm Ben Barry. Danny Palmelis will be back from vacation because he's a slacker. One of these days, we'll be back with a new Sixers Talk podcast after Game 6. This was the Sixers Talk podcast presented to you by Wilmington University. Wilmu Works.